Do you want to play tabletop games online? Well, you're in luck because you're listening to a Pro GM with over 1,000 games run, and I just so happen to be filling tables for campaigns right now. Curse of Strahd, Exandria, Heart, and Vampire the Masquerade. Now is the time to reserve your seat so I can quit my day job and go back to doing what I love, crafting fun adventures with my players. Check out the link in the show notes. Click the play button on my website. You'll see it at the top next to the podcast button, or simply go to startplaying.games/GM/It's Friday to book your seat with one of the world's top game masters. That's me. And welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me Hannah Rose, if you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a tabletop editor and game designer. And I'm happy to be here Friday. We're going to talk about a variety of the stuff that I've worked on.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to ask you up front, what makes a great writer to you? We have a lot of aspiring writers, designers, and things like that. They're amongst our audience and in the community. And as an editor with a ton of experience, you've seen a ton of writing. You've helped a lot of writers develop their submissions for all of these major products. What would you say makes a great writer to you?
Well, a great writer in, let's say, tabletop RPGs is someone who has a really strong grasp of prose, of how to put words together and make them clear and evocative and sound good. And in conjunction with that, somebody who can keep in mind and understand the needs of the audience. And that's double layered for tabletop writing because often you have the audience as the GM or the reader who is looking at the page, whether that's, an adventure or a magic item. And then you have the audience as the players who are actually experiencing using that content in a game. And those are two separate, two overlapping but distinct audiences and readers who are going to experience that material in a different way. And so there's a lot of both technical knowledge and instinct to develop, in addition to just those basic prose skills.
From my perspective, and just me coming into the industry and getting my handle on both the GMing side and the player side, and then also as a designer, one of the biggest things that I've seen that's really a disconnect in a lot of products, at least early in the, let's call it like the 5th edition age,
Life
right?
cycle,
Right, yeah,
yeah.
the first life cycle, was that um, people had great options for the time, but then people wanted options that sort of explored different themes in a more mechanical way. So then we started getting more like Xanathars, right? And then we hit Tasha's, which is like, I guess, 5.2 is what some people call it, 5.2. And then maybe we'll get like, it'll be like 5.3 for the next D&D edition or whatever they want to call it. But and I feel like now players have a lot more options as far as what can narratively represent their characters. Because whenever I am interacting with players, which I do is my full-time job, mostly they're like, how do I present my character as like this hero, like in this heroic fantasy story? And the barrier often is, I want to play this type of character, but there's not necessarily a good option for me, or there's not an option that really appeals to me or is also fun for me and then fits the narrative
The play
text.
style fits both my play style and the aesthetic I have in mind for my character.
Exactly that. That's why. So I love how you just edited my words, um, live on this chat. No, that was great. It's specifically that. So, and I think that's sort of it's definitely a very unique niche skill as a writer, because writing in a silo, for instance, for like writing a story or anything, normally it's just like you and then the editor and then the audience, right? But there's
Mhm.
no like third dynamic to it with the GM involved. And that
Mhm.
totally changes the way that these
Wow.
books are designed.
And a very collaborative relationship with the audience, where you are writing material that is then going to be used in somebody else's story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one of the things that I've gotten the most joy out of for playtesting and showing people our material and stuff is like hearing people's reactions either live in the game as I run the game for them for the playtest material, or they tell me how they ran the adventure that I wrote or something like that. I love that. I am addicted
Yeah,
to it. It's the
that's
best
my
kind.
favorite.
Yeah, it's the best kind of feedback. Even if someone didn't like about it, I still like to hear the story and like what is your like what
Mhm.
was the deal and like how did things work and like all that stuff. Um and it's also kind of cool like I turned in a so I used Spencer Hibnick, Pesto,
Mhm.
for our out of house playtesting. And Spencer's group busted my adventure, um, which I think you might have some experience with or know that that happens. But his group,
Yes.
their group is very good at busting adventures, and they busted this one, and really prevented my adventure from having like this huge gap in it. So yeah, the collaborative nature of designing in tabletop is, I'd say, very unique, and it's like and we were talking briefly about sort of the disparate backgrounds that people come to this profession with and how that really informs things like design choices and voice and how everything is different. And you're in a role a lot of the time as an editor to sort of unify all of those voices. What can a writer do to better present their work to you as an editor and turn that in and do a better job for you?
Comes down to looking at what looking at the best of what is out there and learning to emulate that and then build on it. Um, so one of the things we just touched on, right, was that, at the beginning of the fifth edition life cycle, there were a lot of good character options, there were some adventures, there was, all of that, and things have continued to grow and build. And, um, if we talk about more recent adventures and Flea Mortals, the MCDM monster book and stuff, I'll touch on how I think design as a game design in fifth edition has evolved um over the several years of fifth edition D&D. But I think that that comes from the ability to push the envelope there comes from understanding and emulating the high quality work that is already out there, um, from Wizards of the Coast and other third party publishers, from and also just from your own experiences in your home campaigns. And looking at what makes things effective for story, for players, for combat, for having fun at the table.
Yeah, I was sort of struck with that thought the other day as I was looking on Drive Through RPG or DM's Guild or wherever I was. I think it was DM's Guild. And I saw that there was a sale on like the old third edition Ravenloft adventure, and I was like, wait, there was a third edition adventure of that? Because I just thought it was the I6 from like I think was it second edition or first edition? One of those editions. That was written in the either the 80s or the 90s by the Hickmans. Then I started to dwell on it and I was like, of course it's a rewrite. That's why it's one of the most popular adventures that D&D has ever sold because it's gone through iterations through three generations of writers that have really improved on the core idea of what it is, but they kept intact what the spirit of the initial adventure was, which was like a confrontation with Strahd, right?
Mhm.
Um, and over time, it's like sort of developed, and I have a lot of criticisms that are, I suppose, well known about Curse of Strahd. But like the fact is that these adventures or these products evolve over time to suit the table, and you have a different taste growing in the audience over time that aren't as interested in the old style of play and pushing the envelope, like you said, I suppose is the meta of the industry. That's very
Mhm.
interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. Um, what do you think is one of the sort of, how do I formulate this word? I'm nervous to speak around you because let me see.
Umming and ahhing all over the place, so
Um, yeah, so for you and let's talk about Arcadia.
yeah.
Arcadia was not necessarily, I won't call it an experiment because it's a proven model to put out amazing content. Um, and I just speculation, you don't have to say anything. But speculation on that shutting down really had more to do with the OGL than its success because I feel as though it was highly successful and everybody fucking loved it. I loved it. And it provided useful things. It showcased so many different designers. It was really, I think, in a lot of ways, the best encapsulated spirit of the tabletop market in so many different ways. Can you talk to us about what was your experience like in Arcadia, and walk us through that and like the sort of things that you enjoyed most about that product line?
So when Arcadia was first announced, I was not at MCDM full time, but I know I had worked with James Introcaso on several things before, and I was like, wow, this sounds awesome. This sounds, like something that will be really great for designers and for the community and players, and that sounds really cool. I wish I could work on that. Um, and then a couple months later, James sent me an email and was like, hey, we'd like you to be the copy editor for Arcadia. And I was like, hell yeah, sign me up. Um, so, um, it was a, this, like I said, it was something that satisfied, I guess, the needs of both the design community and the industry and, audience and players and GMs as those all overlap. As, everybody here wears so many hats. And some of the things I think that are really special about it, are that you don't just get one person or one small team's ideas. The ideas are coming from a wide variety of designers who are invited to pitch. And, when the managing editor invites designers to pitch, usually most designers send in 2 to 3 pitches. There are even more things that, even more ideas generated that end up, in the final piece from very different people with very different backgrounds and passions and areas of expertise. And it's the managing editor's job to put together a balanced slate with the right amount of variety and maybe some unifying themes. But it's the best of both worlds in terms of variety and cohesion. And one of the other things that sets it apart is really incredibly rigorous playtesting. Having a dedicated playtest team do not one, but 2 rounds of playtesting so that the material can be initially developed, go through revisions with the managing editor, go through playtesting, then be revised based on those notes, then go through a second round of playtesting, then be revised, then be edited, and then be laid out and proofread, often by the same playtesters. So it's a really in-depth development process that both makes the final product really strong, but also allows a lot of room to experiment and take risks. Because risks that I wouldn't take or wouldn't let an author take if it were just going through an editor or just even going through one round of playtesting, it's possible to take when you can try out like 3 different versions of something and have multiple groups play it and really give like quality in-depth feedback on it, have so many different eyes on it. It makes those risks possible. And I'm really proud of some of the more, out there uh and experimental design that Arcadia has that wouldn't have been possible without that.
You've touched on something that I think gets overlooked due to production cycles a lot of the time for a lot of these publishers, because when someone puts out a new game, it gets rigorously play tested, right? Normally, right? Because they want it to be
In
good, they want it to be
theory.
fun. Yeah, they want it to be great. And then what ends up happening a lot of time with the adventures or small pieces of design that are supplementary to the main core game, they do not get play tested as much. And I have to say that my experience with playtesting thus far in my short game designer lifespan in these last few years has been that without playtesting, we would not have created products in this book to this point at such a high level, because it is so important to get feedback to see what does this actually feel like? Does this actually create the impact that we're looking for? And every other sort of entertainment industry really already does this,
Yeah.
like for cinema and like all
Video
these out.
games.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like so, it just feels like sometimes that is something that is not as developed in the tabletop industry
Mhm.
for a number of reasons. It's probably mostly a money thing.
I think the size of the industry and therefore the, amount of money in it certainly plays a role. But I think a lot of it comes from the fact that it is a that for a variety of reasons, there is a resistance in the industry and community to structuring things too much or to being too formal or corporate or business-like because this is we're just all doing this for fun. We're hobbyists, we should just be able to do whatever we want and making money isn't the point. And that can all be true, but in moderation if you want to make something good and, have a business, make a living, be successful in not just financially, but as a creative. That actually sometimes some structure is a good thing.
There's definitely a huge difference between someone putting like something they designed on their own on itch and just letting it just be out there so that they have stuff in their portfolio and
Yeah,
they
which is
get
awesome.
thoughts. Yeah, that's great. Um, and then trying to sell a product. I feel like there's an ocean of difference between those two things. And sometimes people forget that if you put out a product that isn't as strong or doesn't have great reception or someone bought it and then the next product that you have, they're going to be thinking about that other product that kind of sucked. You know what I mean? That
Right,
clearly wasn't
right.
play tested, that clearly didn't have as much going into it.
And also conversely, you know, putting things out that are for fun, which again is awesome. Like there you said there is that ocean and it's not an either or and one is good and one is bad. It's like everything in the middle. But I think conversely, I see some creators get really good reception on, some early products and people are like, "Yeah, this is so great. I love the idea and this is really awesome." And then they try to push and get to another level and or put their work out at another level and are marketing or looking for more attention and then get very resentful when they don't succeed there. Um and so like you said, recognizing that there are um different levels of publication success or quality demands, I guess.
Are so tight with their money, I think rightfully so in many cases. And you have people who will create like a 1 to 2 hour review video on a product that costs them like $60 because they are just digging into how much sense that people are going to be like how many cents are going to be paying for this adventure, and they're like weighing that against this entire industry of stuff that they've bought previously. So in the
Yeah,
customer's
sorry.
mind, in some of them, like it really matters how much value they get out of it.
I don't disagree, but the way I look at it is also that, like, chances are either you're not going to end up getting a lot of value out of it, either because you aren't inspired by it, don't end up deciding to use it, or because it's good and you just never have a chance to use it, or you're going to get a ton of value out of it because one, $60 supplement or adventure can be hundreds and hundreds of hours of enjoyment. So it is very hard to quantify. Um, it's not even, I mean, like, a video game. You can buy a video game for $60 or nowadays even 70 or 80 or $90, but get, hundreds of hours of playtime plus like talking with your friends and the community and seeing fan art and, all of that. I don't know. So I I am, adamant that products should be well valued and fairly priced for the work and costs that go into them. But I also feel kind of weird about saying, like, well, let's break it down and average, the value that somebody is going to get page by page of this. Because that's, to me, impossible to quantify,
Yeah.
especially looking at it as like an average or expected.
I mean, anyone who knows me know that I'm very pro fair pay, pro labor rights. Like I'm very loud about that. Um, and I just think sometimes it's one of the things actually I was talking about with someone else is it can be difficult to, as a freelancer, like we were talking about writers again, develop your craft in an honest way because sometimes the feedback isn't available from the
Mhm,
people who
mhm.
matter. Like you can get customer feedback, which ultimately matters a lot, but also a lot of the time, and I don't know what your experience with this is, and I don't know what your approach is. You don't necessarily have to talk about this if you don't want, but a lot of designers don't necessarily get earnest feedback from editors, and in order to improve,
Right.
and yeah,
And I've been on both sides of that and understand the difficulties. Um, I think that feedback is incredibly important and valuable, but I also understand the difficulties as an editor and producer of why sometimes that feedback is implicit or non-existent or limited. Um and the I think that is not right unique to this industry. Any creative industry, any industry, um, but especially with so many people coming, from a hobbyist pipeline, is you want to get the most expert eyes you can on your work and get that feedback, right? But that is time and mentorship. Um, and one of the things about Arcadia that was really wonderful was having handpicked designers who then could receive that mentorship and feedback and be part of the development process. Um, and being able to kind of have a unique approach with each designer, depending on where they were in their journey and experience. Um, so but yeah, it can be very difficult, especially on a large project with many designers on a tight timeline, as you can imagine many, projects are, to give individual feedback, which ends up being a level of mentorship, um, to individual designers who are at different places and different levels of work.
I have some experience with like leading teams and managing these sort of things. Um, but earnestly, there are so few places that can offer you a way to like develop as a leader and as a mentor and as a coach. And for your professional career, I assume you've had mentors and you've had professional development, um, and perhaps some mentors or people who you've turned in work to who were not as helpful towards you, or perhaps were had like a negative effect on your career. I just wonder, like, if we're looking at this talking about like post OGL, we're looking at this giant swath of new material and new publishers getting a breath of life. And um, I'll just talk about like for the pro GMing scene, like on Start Playing, we went from 90% Dungeons and Dragons to 70% Dungeons and Dragons in a month, in which we had 30%, like 20% of the market share just spread out
Mm-hmm.
just within a month
And is
because of the
that
OGL thing.
holding steady now, almost a year later?
I believe so, yeah.
Interesting.
Because
Interesting.
yeah, because people started to play other games and got exposed to more games. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the initiatives that Start Playing Games does is they partner with publishers now to run events for
Mm-hmm.
their games. Like, hey, we're going to promote these professional GMs to run our games in our newsletter, bring more traffic to the website. And like, for instance, like Free League does it, World of Darkness, the people behind Morkborg, so on and so forth. So all these people are like getting all this additional traffic, and what they've seen on the website is for these other games that are not D&D, they normally see like a 10% increase on uh, the amount of games that are being run of their system. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really just more and more advertising because they finally figured out a way to like get their foot in the door and get more people talking and get more of a community around their game. Just exposure, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm not sure where I was going with that. I'm just talking about stuff at this point. But um, for for you and developing a team and like being a part of this very intricate process, the editor is normally the last person that sees things and makes changes and things like that. Um, for you,
It's the lead and layout, actually.
okay, yeah, yeah.
But it depends on the role of the editor,
Hmm.
and what kind of editor the project, of course.
Right, yeah, yeah. For you as the editor, and you're finally getting things after that collaboration has happened, how much work do you do alongside the lead as an editor in order to bring out the vision of the product?
Mhm. Totally depends on the product. Um, because so right now I'm working on something. I guess the sort of minimum level is if I am copy editing or proofreading something, I will go through it. I will compile some questions or comments to send to the lead. I'll send that to the lead and maybe the managing editor, and get answers on those, make my edits accordingly, and then turn it in. That's kind of the basic, most simple level. Um, and it really depends on kind of the state of the piece, how much that's I'm just polishing it up, or if I'm like reorganizing it and adjusting the descriptions or mechanics or organization to fit the intent um and goal of the product. And then, yeah, at higher levels, it can be a lot of it could be a lot of back and forth. It could be several drafts and editing passes. As a managing editor, right, I am the lead in many respects. Um, at least in the experiences I've had, right? So like as Arcadia, as the managing editor, um, that meant that basically it was very like individual designer focused for the author of each article, but the role I filled was also as the lead designer overseeing the article from start to finish, uh coordinating with playtesting and art and layout, um and seeing it, um guiding the author in their first drafts and revisions, so seeing it throughout the whole process.
Okay, that's interesting because normally, from what I understand, standard is normally like second or third draft editor sees it, right? And then,
But it depends on if it's a developmental editor or copy
right,
editor or
yeah.
proofreader, right? So, yeah, editing encompasses many things. So for example, for Arcadia, we've discussed, right, that has a long and many layered development cycle, but the copy editor for Arcadia usually gets the about the seventh draft.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, 7th to 9th um draft. And
And
so then the copy editor will edit it and then it goes into layout.
yeah, and for our audience, copy editing in this case is
Copy editing is um is editing the text, the manuscript for clarity, consistency, flow, and style. So sure that includes like fixing uh you know grammar and awkward sentence flow and typos, um but it also includes technical knowledge of, in this case, the D&D style guide, the publisher's house style, um and really paying attention to it's kind of a as an editor or designer, but especially as a copy editor, I feel like I'm running a like mini playtest in my head throughout the process of editing. And as we mentioned before, like thinking about, well, what is the first reader or the GM thinking when they read this, and then what are the players doing with it, and kind of envisioning those both of those scenarios um as I go through it as an editor. So, um, deciding, whether something needs to be defined or mentioned earlier or cross-referenced or reorganized, um, or if, identifying when some information is contradictory, or also identifying what information might be missing.
yeah.
And
And
that can all fall under copy editing.
yeah, that's a lot of stuff. And that takes I feel like that takes like a ton of experience in order to do that. First as a designer to understand that sort of nuance and like what is the intent and to be able to have those conversations to like meet in the middle to satisfy everyone along the process and like create a quality product. And I've had discussions with my amazing lead designer, who's like basically a copy editor for us, or a developmental editor, I should
Yeah.
say, for us.
Yeah.
And uh, it's Nat Kryman. I don't know if you worked with Nat Kryman on.
I've worked with them directly, but I know of
Okay, yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He and I were looking at something, and it was like a scenario in which the players were put in a position, I think unknowingly by the designer, that they would be fighting things um, in which they would have maybe like 9 to 15% chance of hitting the thing. Um,
Yeah.
and that's like definitely a huge developmental editing problem. It's like,
Right.
did you realize how
Do
badly
you
you
want
have?
this to be
Yeah,
very frustrating
yeah,
for the players, and is this narratively intentional? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely like the sort of understanding that takes time to learn a system and how does this system work? How is it intended to be played? What
Hmm.
is the intent
Yes.
of the game as well as what is the intent of the
Mm.
adventure? And then
Yeah.
meet those two things.
And that sounds really hard, and it is, but also like instincts and experience can go and attention to detail go a long way. Like I'm a much better editor now than I was 5 years ago, but I mean, I think I was a pretty decent editor 5 years ago based on my instincts and attention to detail. So, um, it the effort and critical thought put into it, again, can go a long way.
Yeah, and speaking of effort and thought, let's talk about your design. So you did the animals in the animal section in Flea Mortals. What's your favorite one, and why is it your favorite one? Let's talk about your animals.
Oh,
You can do more
I
than one
should have
if you
been
want.
prepared for this question. But it's so hard to pick from all of my wonderful children. Um, I think. Oh, okay. Hmm. God, I could talk about like all of them are my favorite for different reasons. I think the wildcats, I have to say the wildcats in the animals section because I am um a cat person, not that I don't like dogs, I love dogs, but I am a cat person with two cats who loves uh engaging with cats big and small in D&D games or turning into cats or other animals. I'm a druid enthusiast. And obviously researching all different kinds of cats, cougars and panthers and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. The bears were also very fun to research. I learned that Usain Bolt cannot outrun a bear. He can outrun a bear for like a couple seconds and then the bear will catch up to him. Um and this fact was quoted in at least 3 different sources I read trying to figure out how fast a bear can run.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so the cats were really fun. And but also the dragonettes, which are not in the animals section but in the dragon section, um were just one of those things you create that starts with a like this would be cool idea and then everything falls into place and you start going, wow, this is awesome, I did this, where did this come from? Not to toot my own horn, but it was just really fun because it things that felt good kept coming out naturally during the design process. It really built on itself.
Yeah.
um so in this case, like, um you know looking at a little dragony draconic companion creature that would be fun to have as a familiar in a party, and um I decided, because they're like super interested in magic, I decided that they hate secrets or they don't understand secrets. They want to discover and find out the truth, and so they don't understand like lies and keeping secrets from your friends, right? Keeping secrets from your enemies, sure, but not from your friends. So that opens up what I hope is the possibility for fun role play with party members hiding secrets from each other, and a dragonette companion or familiar can be an impetus uh for them to have to share those secrets or have those secrets come out. Um but then when I was figuring out their abilities, it was also like, well, what can they do? Because they're very utility focused, right? What can they do as a companion? Um, and um, so what's kind of their like breath weapon? And I wanted something utility, not damage. So then it was like, oh, well, let's give them the ability to like reveal magic. So basically, like a detect magic area of effect with their breath, or that as a familiar, or that they can gain true sight, and then they can share that with their spellcasting companion if they're a familiar. And that it was felt very draconic, but it just came out of their personality. So yeah, stuff like that was really fun. I want a dragonette familiar.
And just as a note, adjacent to that, I love that Flea Mortals has the hyperlink for the pronunciation for dragon names because those are the death of me. Every time I see a dragon name, I'm like, how do I pronounce that thing? Um, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
beautiful.
I
Um,
enjoyed that. And then of course nicknames, because they're cute. They're so cute. I want one.
yeah.
Of course they have long complicated dragon names, but they're also little baby dragon friends. They have nicknames.
Um, and yeah, going back to your animals piece, one of the things that I run into most of all when I'm like running a game has been that a lot of the druidic forms, the animal forms that can be used for your B shape, are just sort of like plain, not as
Right.
um, interesting
Flavorful.
or strategic or tactical. It's like
Mhm.
which everybody like every CR it's like I can be this thing because it does the most damage, and then that's the decision. It's based
But then
on
my,
damage.
but then my AC is 12 and all of my other party members' ACs are like 16. And
Yeah.
sure, you're a great tank, this whole hit point buffer as a original 5th edition druid, but it still kind of sucks when your AC is 12. And then you have like 2 beast choices if you're a Circle the Moon druid, and you can eventually transform into a CR6 beast, and there are like 2 CR6 beasts that exist. So probably more than 2, but maybe only 2 in the monster manual.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very limited.
Yeah. I love that you gave the bear a recharge ability, by the way. That is that is so cool. I really like the the sort of like natural design that MCDM did with the traits as well. And I believe that was that in the style guide for Flea Mortals? Was that like a very intentional style guide thing? Like you must create these very easy to learn, make sense, and fun to play traits? Because I just see that as a consistent thing.
Yeah, that's definitely, the design philosophy, right? Is that all the actions should be interesting. Not complicated, but necessarily, but interesting, right? Um, there's not a lot of stuff that is just this hits and deals damage, and the creature has like 3 different attacks that just hit and deal different kinds of damage. Like, boring. Um, but again, keeping it easy to run and resolve. So, like, the Bear's claw attack is a melee weapon attack that deals slashing damage, but then it has an interesting bit where if the target is medium or smaller, they are knocked prone. So you have a tactical element and a cinematic element there of things happening in combat.
Yeah, absolutely. And the recharge ability, the swipe to knock
Yeah,
people away and knock them
yeah.
prone.
Like it,
Um,
it totally fits as a recharge, right? The bear needs a little like kind of time to wind that up. There's only so much they can do it, but it's also just a balance thing. Because I wanted to keep the bear no more than CR2, but also like bears are really freaking strong.
yeah.
Um Bears are really powerful. The polar bear is like possibly the most deadly animal on Earth, and also has incredible endurance. And but then it was like trying not to, it's a balance between being somewhat true to that real world inspiration, but also making it easily usable in a game.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's sort of like I guess the evolution now that I see as like who is at the forefront of design at 5e. When I first came into design, it was clear to me that it was MCDM doing Arcadia and working up and like releasing their packets for Flea Mortals, and seeing that sort of these sort of design decisions that really made sense for where the players were at and where the community was at that time, as opposed to designing to reference documents that were made in like 2014 before people start playing the game. Because there's the evolution of the community and like the 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 game itself as it keeps
Hmm.
evolving.
The design
Um,
philosophy. And Wizards has done a lot with their own design philosophy and approach um, that has evolved in many ways very parallel to the MCDM design philosophy, which is very interesting as a designer and creator to see how similar recognition of the same problems has evolved into sometimes very similar and sometimes very different approaches to solutions.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things that I actually learned from Nat, again, I'll talk about Nat because that's what this whole conversation is, design and copy editing and stuff, but um, was finding out that there's like an answer in the DMG, and then there's the answer that Wizards puts out each time they publish a new adventure. And that is like usually the CR representations for HP, damage, everything from hit points. Usually those things fluctuate and change and evolve over time. And you can find those averages every time a new product comes out, and you can see where is the design putting things right now, because Wizards is playtesting these things and they're seeing that,
Mm,
hey, we need the HP to be at around here, we need the damage to be
mhm,
around here, and those things aren't really represented in the GMG anymore. In most cases, I think there's a few CRs that are still like kind of in the same realm, but a lot of these things have like kind of evolved over time,
mhm,
and now the design philosophy, or the design guidance um, is not necessarily helpful in a lot of ways in the DMG, just because it's outdated, which is
mhm.
to be expected.
Right.
But I kind of wonder if the new edition is going to have the
Yeah, that
same
would be
sort of,
great. That would be
yeah.
great. I imagine it will be revised. I mean, the monster design philosophy that we see in Mordenkainen's throughout the last several books, but especially in Mordenkainen's, um, Monsters of the Multiverse, is very much evolved from, from the original Monster Manual and DMG.
Yeah, very much so. Um, okay. And I did want to talk about your work with the all of the Exandria books that you've done. So just for the audience here, do you want to share like, so you worked on Tal'Dorei Reborn, you worked on Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, you worked on
Call of the Netherdeep.
yeah, I was just making sure I got, yeah, you were an editor on that one. Okay, cool. Um, so what was did you work on the first version of Tal'Dorei? The campaign setting?
I was around for that, but not
Okay.
directly.
Okay, okay. Um, yeah, I'm really curious, like, what your um sort of experience was as one of the lead designers of Tal'Dorei Reborn in particular, and also the managing editor. And how did you balance those two roles, and like, what did that mean for you just
Mhm.
in your role as a professional?
Right. Well, I think we touched on earlier, as you were saying with Nat, that often the work of a managing editor and a lead designer can overlap a lot. And especially when you are juggling many projects, having those be separate people can be very good, but it um really came down to just me wearing a lot of hats at once, which it was a lot, but in some ways also made things very easy, right? Because I had all of the details in my head. And so I didn't have to spend a lot of time writing emails to explain certain things to other people, because it was just myself, and I. And James Hake and Ivan and our copy editors who had context on that, and we were working with them. Um, but it it really meant um you know creating a structure and environment for all of our collaborators, and um pulling together all of the details to realize the vision for this book that we had set out at the beginning, um and seeing that process all the way through. um the I can sort of split it up as like things like, oh, as a lead designer, you know, I wrote the outline for the book and decided what order things should come in, and I wrote or revised various sections myself. But then I also oversaw our copy editors, Scott Fitzgerald Gray and Marcy Wood, and our proofreader Matt Key, in their work, and gave them the assignments and instructions and answered their questions, and compiled their edits into the final product, and then made adjustments here and there myself as we went into layout, and took care of and lore review, and took care of final details.
Also, I just wanted to point out, Also, you were the art director, one of the art directors. So like as though like so there's all of that, and then also you had art direction. Um, can you talk to me briefly about art direction? How did you end up with that job as well?
Yeah. So when James and I were brought on to lead Tal'Dorei Reborn, we, created our outline and asked who's going to be the art director, and Ivan said, "Well, you are us." And the Critical Role has a wonderful art director, Arthur Loftus, who at the time was very busy with The Legend of Vox Machina. So we put together a list of potential artists, both based on recommendations from Liam, Art Dad, and honestly a lot of looking through social media of various artists who to see who would fit the style and quality level and, reliability that we were looking for. And we didn't have a, mandate or anything to only work with critter artists. There were some reached out to, but um skill and passion uh and so many wonderful freelance artists in the Critical Role community that we ended up with a slate of, I think, out of all of the new artists on the book, like 28 critter artists. And that was certainly a huge plus to have people who were already familiar with the property and the characters and the world, especially on the very short timeline we were on, and who were passionate about it. So it was a absolutely wonderful, um, for me, incredibly impactful and transformative experience as a creator, um, to work with so many wonderful artists with all of their talent and passion and to learn a lot about that process. And I mean, collaboration is one of my favorite parts of, being a creator and designer. And this just turned that up to a whole new level.
For folks that end up creating things at a smaller scale and they end up wearing many hats, uh, either due to like circumstance or like budget concerns or whatever, what's your advice for those beginning art directors?
See, at first I would say, I mean, choose your collaborators well, choose your collaborators carefully. That's such a huge component. Figure out your budget and decide how you are going to balance amount of art with cost of art because there is a trade-off, right? You might decide that you want to have fewer pieces of really good art. Um, but you also might not be able to afford a $2,000 cover, right? And that's fine. But maybe a $1,000 cover or a $500 cover is going to be worth more than another 3 or 4 pieces of interior art. Um, and artists, while there are some industry standards, freelance artists, especially, I think, in tabletop and fantasy, live all over the world, and so their rates can vary a lot based on their own cost of living. Um, which means that sometimes some artists are just gonna be more expensive because they live in places with very high cost of living, which is uh fine for them. They are amazing and I love working with some of them, but if you're on a budget, then if you're looking for a certain style and level of skill, sometimes some artists can be less expensive or are willing to have more flexibility. So yeah, researching your artists and, identifying what style you want. Um, Explaining that style, so saying telling your artists, um, what you are looking for, what the timeline is, um, either giving your rates or asking them to set their rates, and there can potentially be some negotiation there. But, asking them for their rates and respecting that. Um, Sometimes, for example, when I've done art direction or done art direction for Arcadia, I reached out to an artist that I'd worked with on Taldore, and because um it was a quick timeline, I was asking for an extra piece of spot art. um they quoted me a really high rate for it. Um and I looked at it and I was like, I don't know, like, we could do that, but that seems really high. So I went back to them and said, hey, what would the rate be if you had 2 more weeks on this? And we slotted it into layout at the end. And they said, oh, well, I could do that for like $200 less. And so I was like, great. So, it is a lot of people management, that's really fun and rewarding, but as with any people management, giving information up front and setting clear expectations, and deadlines, um, is really important. And respecting, the time of your freelancers, giving references, um and respecting the time of your freelancers. I think there's a lot to say here, so I'm just rambling on, but um
No, I love this conversation, and I want to talk about working with freelancers and leadership. So
yeah.
I'm deep in it.
Um
Let's go for it.
I feel like that might need to be an episode all on its own. But um I had some exposure to like other publishers' internal art briefs and art brief guidelines. I am sure that there are resources out there where you can ask your artist friends, what a good art brief looks like. But there is absolutely an art, no pun intended, um, to writing a good brief for the artist, because creative freedom is important. And as an art director, you both don't need to take the time and don't want to annoy the artist by saying, like, and this person is wearing exactly these robes, and I think they should have a teal belt, unless that, like, teal belt is, right, important to the story, but, I think they should have a teal belt, and they should have shoulder-length curly brown hair, and they should be sitting on a, stone throne and, like, go on for, 4 paragraphs. Um, because you don't wanna constrain the artist, you wanna trust them. But also, if you just say, um, "We need art of a human woman in fancy dress," some artists might be fine with that, and others, might might feel like you're actually asking them for more work because you are also asking them to design that outfit, or not telling them, you're asking them to make a lot of visual and creative decisions. How old is this, human woman? Are they from any particular culture or inspired by any real world culture or race? Um, what does fancy dress mean? Are they in armor? Are they a spellcaster or a warrior or neither? Um, so giving context is and some guidance that might be, like 3 to 5 bullet points, that might be 2 paragraphs. Sometimes, especially with artists I've worked with, I'll put in, like, a couple suggestions or ideas that aren't like, "It must be like this," but are like, "I think it might be cool if," um, And sometimes those can include visual references, which can take a lot of time when writing an art brief, but can be very helpful, especially when you have a, you know, character with a defined style or defined pieces they're carrying or a landscape. Um, References will both help you define what you're looking for, help you get what you're looking for, and save time and effort for the artist themselves. Um, so yeah, there are a lot of pieces that go into it, and it is hard work writing up art briefs, but then it's so rewarding getting back thumbnails and sketches and seeing it brought to life. Um, that's yeah, that's just really wonderful.
Yeah. Um, that's all wonderful advice. Um, Aspiring art directors need to rewind this podcast for that, um, and play it back when they're developing. Like, I feel like a lot of these things that you're getting to is like, just as a professional being a leader in this space, it is so important that you have your all your shit in one kit bag, before like you're approaching these freelancers and you're getting them the information as quickly as possible or when it's appropriate to, and then making sure that you're available to them to be a resource. um, and I think that's not necessarily something that people initially think is part of the process, because um, I think it can be difficult to understand just how much juggling will go into it and how many hours it actually
Mhm.
does take to lead a project like this. Um, it's way more time intensive than people initially think, I believe.
Very detail intensive. As a freelancer myself for a lot of my career, figuring out some good work-life balance is very important. Um, but also, for example, when it came to Taldore, we had a very tight timeline, and I was basically on call for all our artists for 6 months, of juggling 28 artists, creating over 100 new illustrations, and it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. They were all wonderful, wonderful, creators and illustrators. Um, but, as you touched on, mm, being a leader and making a good experience for your collaborators and freelancers and supporting them is so vital, and so rewarding, right? Not just in the abstract sense, but like in what you get and in the quality of the work and in people wanting to work with you again. Um, and so, getting people feedback and answering questions really quickly, um, is, has a lot of value, is incredibly, incredibly important.
I can't think of a better place for us to pause this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, Hannah. Um, the links for Hannah's work and Hannah's website, in case you want to contact Hannah to hire Hannah for your freelancing needs, any of the diverse roles that Hannah plays on a team. You can find those in the show notes.